I'm live. I'm still alive. What fun. And there were a few people who were waiting, so maybe they're in the room. It doesn't matter. I'll start anyway. I mean, it does matter. I'm grateful for you being here. But I'll start anyway. And I'll start with something, an old idea for me. For me, a lot of what goes on is that I run reruns of old ideas. That is, I rethink them. And I had an insight last night about one that I probably came up with 30 years ago. Um, I call it transceiver bias. Transceiver is something that is transmitting and receiving as well. So what I noticed years ago um, is that when I'm playing music, I'm pouring my entire heart into what I'm playing. At my best, I do. And then I'm hearing it through the passion that I am generating. Hey, Michael, good to have you here. So I'm putting out and then hearing myself through the passion that I've generated. And so transceiver bias is this bias that comes from wanting to, you could say, put your best foot forward playing music. Hey, Shirley, good to have you here. Uh, and then hearing yourself through it. So if I'm playing and I'm kicking my head back like I'm Carlos Santana, I'm hearing myself through that, which is also why it's a little startling sometimes to hear what you sound like. Hey, Jeff, nice to hear you trying being. Nice to see you guys here. Nice to see my fellow trying beings. So when you're trying to express yourself and then you're hearing yourself through that self-expression, it's a bias. And one that's fascinated me and shows up in lots of different places. For example, if I look in the mirror and I want to look my best, I'll be generating a look like I'm at my best, and then I'm seeing myself through that. Or when I am indulging, as I am here, in a tunnel vision monologue reverie, that is expressing my ideas and I get really enthusiastic about them, it's why I can't hear how I sound as well. Um, and so yeah, there are other versions of it as well. When I taught writing, I used to have to tell my students the theme was that writing is not reading. That is, if you're pouring yourself into your writing and you're very enthusiastic, at your best, you're enthusiastic about it, you don't hear what it's like. You have to go to it cold. You have to visit it as neutrally as possible. So the insight I had last night that got interesting to me is that, in a way, I think the biggest challenge for humankind is transceiver bias, trying to get to a place where what you aspire to be um, is not clouding your judgment. There's a Buddhist line I like: "Truth waits for eyes unclouded by desire, by longing," to where you can actually see what the actual fuck you are. And this would not be fun for people any more than it's fun to look at a picture of yourself and say, geez, I look like that. Or listen to a recording of yourself and say, uh, geez, I sound like that. It's disappointing. It's often disappointing. Not always. Sometimes I look at my videos and I think, wow, that's not bad, Jeremy. But and that is, I'm looking at them trying to move back into this neutral state. You could say the entire world of marketing, which fascinates me. I think we are all human marketers to some extent, is getting out of your own self-infatuation enough to see what the audience actually sees of your product. They call it product-focused marketing, is where you're kind of infatuated with your own product, and as a result, can't uh, you disconnect with your audience. Um, so just this idea of actually being able to tolerate looking at what we actually are, what I actually am as a human being, with all the care I have about what I am, that is hoping I'm good. Um, Getting that out of the way. Truth waits for eyes unclouded by longing, but also just in general, across humankind, to actually take an anthropological perspective on us, um, what we are. And so I'm happy to talk about that today. And Jeff, you're nailing it. That is exactly the question. So I've looked up autophobia It tends to mean fear of being alone, but in the descriptions of it, it's also it's associated with the kind of thing that I'm making more the theme of it: fear of self-knowledge, of knowing as best you can what you actually are. Um, and I see it everywhere. Let's see, how did this group overcome autophobia? Jeff raises, I'm not sure it has. I would never claim that I have overcome it. I hear that a lot from people, and yet I think that that's another one of those autophobic moves. That is, I've graduated out of it. I am now officially self-aware and have integrity. Um, so I have trouble responding to that kind of we overcame it thing, because part of me wants to encourage it and part of me wants to say, and yeah, no, we never do. One of the earliest mantras in my work, very ironic. My early mantras were paradoxes. No matter how hard I chase the truth, it will never catch me, was one of my early ones. I wouldn't put it past me was another one, which is not especially ironic. And yeah, in general, that's where I go. Is that I wouldn't, the way what I'm trying to do is be as realistic as possible about what we are, including that we are really tempted to be unrealistic. I have to be realistic about how unrealistic humans have to be. And that puts me in this confusing situation. So no matter how hard I chase the truth, it will never catch me, as an example of that. Let me see what we've got here. Yes, it's about exercising autophobia. Sorry, it's about managing autophobia. And part of that is, for me, exercising this tunnel vision monologue reverie, the self-infatuation that I don't think humans can escape. That's why I had problem with the idea of overcome, is that there are all of these campaigns to become selfless, and I just think they're doomed. It becomes inevitably ego is beneath me, which is ironic. It's ironic in a way. I'm not the first to notice this. A mathematician, logician, and a deep ironist, Ray Smulyan, makes the argument that anybody who claims to know who is arrogant is playing the top authority on who's arrogant, which is itself arrogant. So he was very interested in that stuff. I had come up with this thing that I loved, and then found out that he had gone halfway there. It's this idea that there are two kinds of people: those who do and those who don't recognize we're all one. So he had made that argument. This is a guy who came out, he was mostly interested in logic puzzles that are mostly beyond me. That is, the kind of things he does with Gödel's incompleteness theorem are hard for my mind. My mind doesn't work that well in math. I solve for pattern like a mathematician, but math, maybe it's an aversion from childhood. I mean, I did fine in calculus and all of that, but it's not how my mind works. But the other part that he didn't get to was, I'm both. That is, I'm both the person who recognizes that we are all the same and we are not all the same. Otherwise, I couldn't do the work I do trying to understand absolutists. I recognize in myself the appetites for absolutism that that is in absolutists. But I live in that tough middle ground, and in general, I do. Yes, Michael, checks and balances, balance checks. I think I've come up with my terminological solution to that. Checks in balance works. So that's how I think about it these days. And it's very much about that. The truth has been chasing you a long time, but you run too fast. That's right. No, that's right. And so what I've been noticing in these last few weeks, let me see if there's any questions here or comment or critiques or anything. Feel free to kick the tires. Oh, well, one paradox that we're all dealing with, the absolutists are more realistic about how unrealistic human beings are, and the non-absolutists are more they're more unrealistic in pretending that we're realistic. It's really hard for humans to be realistic. This is painful, this business of having to deal with trade-offs in everyday life. And that has certainly been a theme for me in the last few weeks, is this thing that I've been calling cornucopia, which is when you can't cope with trade-offs, you escape into infinites. That is, into infinite abundance. And I see this on the left, I see this on the right. So many of my friends still talk like love is this cost-free, infinite resource, whereas I don't see it that way. I think of it as trade-offs. And Trumpism is basically, I think it's nothing but, if it's good, I've got it to the infinite. If it's bad, you've got it to the infinite. I don't hear any content there. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I'm not listening for content because I don't think they're thinking. I don't think they're believing. I think they're feeling and braying like animals, territorial pissing, um, but making it sound like a papal decree. Okay, let's see. The truth has been chasing you a long time. Uh, there is still this question: how does one overcome autophobia? Um, I gotta say, I'm seeing the problem, that challenge everywhere. I have the good fortune to work with very sophisticated academics on these fundamental biophilosophical questions. Um, in a way, I wouldn't have the credibility in that circle. I got my PhD and all that, but I'm not at a university. And at first, I felt punked by that because I wasn't at a university. I didn't have that status. I mean, there are situations I've been in where it was a real problem for me. One comes to mind. I used to be uh, seated at dinner at my old master's public policy program at Berkeley with a board member who was of high esteem. He was the guy who invented the laser and won a Nobel Prize for it. And he would say, "So where do you teach?" And I taught at this digital arts college called Expression College for the Digital Arts. It was painful. I mean, you couldn't have picked a worse name. It sounded like a 1980s hair salon. But I would swallow and tell him. But in the meantime, I get to hang out with academics because I am, you could say, parasitic on the status of Terrence Deacon. I just came back from a dog walk with him. We walk maybe 3 to 5 times a week. We've been jamming for 30 years. He's an unusual academic for his approach, and it does tie into this thing I was just talking about of the cornucancopias. His approach is totally addictive to me, and I'll explain why in a minute. I think I can get there. Good morning, Wiegand, and good morning, Kwahu. Uh, let's see. Uh, so he was a Harvard neuroscientist. There's a phenomena in neuroscience named after Terrence Deacon, and he's a Berkeley professor, full professor of neuroscience and biological anthropology. But he was unusual because he didn't care about status. He cared about curiosity, which is exactly what I'm doing here. Curiosity is the thing for me, and it's a hard thing. We're still on this question of how you start to overcome autophobia, but curiosity is hard going for people. What if you discover something about yourself that is like a fatal flaw? It's terrifying. I mean, it's to really spelunk around your internal life. Reminds me of waiting for the results of a biopsy. And what if you discover a fatal flaw? What are you going to do about that? So, no, I understand why we'd be so gingerly about it. Anyway, what I was going to get to is that parasitic on Terry's status, because I've worked with him for 30 years, and people see me as understanding his work best of all. Of anybody who's been studying with him, because I've been in it that long. Just that. The autophobia among biophilosophers is intense. It's intense. And the way they escape looking at what the actual fuck we even are, even though they have PhDs in that topic, the way they deal with it is through the same thing that the spiritual people do, which is they assume an infinite cost-free supply of something. The example that comes quickest to mind is the assumption of information. Many top physicists, top philosophers just assume information. Or you could do the thing that Chomsky did with language, which is he simply assumed at the start that there's this whole, that we have a thing inside our brain that does language. And to me, it strikes me as I appreciate his progressive political work. His work on linguistics is pitiful. It reminds me of what a fourth grader could come up with. So he's trying to explain language and how we could ever learn it. Um, uh, and Skinner, B.F. Skinner, had argued that we learn it by trial and error. And Chomsky says, well, we can't. It's too complicated for that. And so what does he do? He posits a complete explanation in your mind for having language, which is this grammar module into which you slot words, but the grammar module is just in there. We are doing that a lot in the sciences. And that is, we can simply posit cost-free infinite supplies of things like information. That the entire universe is made of information is a standard move. Or what we call panpsychism, which is that every atom is trying a little bit. And when you get enough atoms together, you got recognizable trying. Those are the same kind of dodges you see in spirituality. I have a good buddy. He's actually more than that. He asked me to be his godfather. And so he's my godson bro, who's getting a degree in all of this stuff in the biophilosophy work. And he asked me the other day whether I thought science, normal science as it's going, that is the sociological world of science. He just got his PhD in the philosophy of science. That is, how does science work, or how should it work? It's both. And he says, well, don't you think we'll come to understand the universe through scientific progress as it's currently done? And I said, no, I don't. And that's because I think we're waiting for a third scientific revolution that I think Terry has given us a kind of a pioneering approach to. And this becomes, by the way, I got to say, this is a real problem. There are tons of theories right now in about how it all holds together, the grand picture of things. And Terry's can look like just another also ran. It's another one of those theories. I'm saying it's a different method. It's a fundamentally different method, and I don't care if anybody buys his answers to the questions, but I'm really trying to get people cornered with the question: how do selves and trying emerge within nothing but dissipative chemistry? That's the question that gets dodged over and over. And I think I've got an explanation, but the explanation is not as important as just trying to get people to look at that question. Because that's where you would go if you really could overcome your autophobia and say, wait a second, there's selves struggling for their own existence, and then there's dissipative chemistry. And yeah, you can do math that just assumes dissipative chemistry. That's the reductionist approach. Or you could do math that assumes information, assumes trying, which is what we do in the social sciences. And the gap between them, they're just treated as separate realms. So what I'm trying to do, what Terry's been trying to do for decades, starting with work in neuroscience on having language, how we ever evolved language, a book that when I first read it 30 years ago made me cry because it was just too hard for me to understand. It's one of the reasons why I wrote a simpler version of his approach in a book called Neither Ghost Nor Machine, but also why I make video after video, is I realized that a lot of people weren't getting what he was offering, and that a lot of people didn't want it because of the autophobia. So what I think of as coming out altogether is selves, that is individuals, agents, making effort, that is, it's a kind of work that we living beings do. It's functional, that is, there's good and bad, better and worse work. In physical chemistry, there's just work. So selves making functional interpretive effort. Interpretation is where information kicks in. Information is not out in the world. It's in the capacity to interpret something in a way that is functional for their effort to remain a self. And getting scientists to even just look at that damn question has been really hard because they can go off, they can sidestep the question in all sorts of ways, but they're always doing it by pulling out of thin air some cornucopia. That is some way of saying, well, okay, there's abundant information in the universe. Everything's information, something like that. Let me see. There's more to say there, but I don't want to lose my audience in a tunnel vision monologue uh, reverie. Is my friend Deacon a Trump supporter? It's a great question. No, certainly not. And this is an interesting aspect of our relationship. So we took our walk this morning. He had trouble with the psychoproctology work. We're almost opposite temperaments. It took us a long time to get to where we were comfortable with each other. Uh, but now it's really easy. We talk about my psychoproctology theories. He resonates with them. He's a cleaner living guy than me. He's not nearly as mouthy. I'm kind of like his bulldog, and I've gotten in trouble for being too much of a bulldog for him. Darwin had his bulldog, and I'm kind of Terry's bulldog. That is, I'm way mouthier than he is. His capacity for tact blows my mind. He can sit and listen patiently to a theory from a friend or a relative or a fellow academic and find something to agree with to generate further conversation with them. That is not my forte. I am, I noticed the other week, most people attribute conflict to belligerence. I think you have to give some credit for conflict to to incuriosity. That is one of the reasons why I lean towards blunt, not just because it's my temperament, and even you could say the stigma of being punked a fair amount as a kid by people who are far more verbal than me. But one of the reasons I do it is because I recognize the autophobia. People are just terrified of anything that would actually imply that they are humans. The need for feeling exceptional would be huge in us. And so sometimes I try to plow through, and I would not say I do it skillfully necessarily. I'm trying to be more skillful at it, but sometimes I just I lean towards glib, casual, self-effacing bluntness. This is us. This is the human condition. Let's meet each other in that, without the whole romantic overlay, which I'm arguing here is a product of cornucopias. That is the infinite love. Or the thing that's been on my mind for maybe a month now is I represent infinite love. I represent infinite goodness, which means that I get to judge who is loving and who is not. Try this one out. I am against judgment. I'm the guy who says, don't be judgmental. And because of that, I'll be the judge of who's being judgmental. That's the standard move. That's what you get with the cornucopia. That's exactly what Trump does, and nothing but. That's all he does. That is, I mean, it's just, we've never seen anything like it. This guy makes mistake after mistake and yet still holds the supreme authority on what's a lie, what's hypocrisy, what's good, what's bad. And what a liberation that is. That is, he's got all of the infinite virtues. He's got all the virtues to the infinite, and that's why anybody who disagrees with him is advice. Okay, let's see. Trial and error isn't everything. The Chomsky language model is not naive. Pitching balls is trial and error, but you need an arm. Yeah, okay, it is naive. By the way, I got to just tell you, totally fine if you don't think it's naive. That's fine. No one has to believe me. But uh, but here's where we would find common ground. Uh, there are things that are universal about language, but it's not a module in the brain that somehow evolved by chance. It's how language would ever be able to ground itself in reality. So, David, let's try this out. Um, Kids don't learn grammar. You learn grammar in school as an afterthought. They learn habits of speech by trial and error, and the trial and error is about whether they succeed in getting what they want or not. Um, and yes, they have an arm in your metaphor, which is that they have things they want. And if they can't find anything that sounds like what they need to convey in order for an adult to hear it, um, to understand it, then they'll try something else. So it is trial and error, and he simply rejects that as impossible and goes to an engineering method. That is, how would you engineer a language module, which is an engineered add-on? He said, let's add a bell and whistle here. Everybody's got one of these things. There's no cost or benefits. It's simply something you ended up with. Okay, this mental ease that he talks about. Okay, but we do by trial and error, and there are universals in grammar, but those universals are what you could call forced solutions is one way they're talked about, or they're also talked about as homoplazy. Is that the word? Yeah, I think so. There, here's how to think about it. I'm going to say the word hard. Okay, that's an attribute of something, but I haven't said what it's an attribute about. So you can say, what's hard? But if I said hard and pointed to something hard, then you'd know what I was talking about. So I've got to indexically ground it to something in the real world. And that's why index fingers are so hugely important to youngsters. They've got to figure out what's what. They've got to point. You notice the dogs are not responsive to points. They don't understand the finger thing. They do understand gesture directionality, but they're not learning language the way we are. And what you can do with language, and this actually does relate to the cornucantcopia thing, is that at some point you can achieve a liftoff from reality by saying, my hairbrush is hard. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken a iconic term, hairbrush. I know lots of hairbrushes. You know lots of hairbrushes. And then I use an index finger in verbal form is hard. So I can give a commonly understood in our language concept, the hairbrush, an attribute. And I do that through language, and I could do that by saying, for example, that the rhinoceros that is balancing twirling the entire universe on its horn is pink. Okay, I can do that. That's the thing that language enables me to do, and I can do it about real things and unreal things. Okay, so let me walk back the trial and error assertion. In the big picture, it is everything because of evolution. Yeah, not everything from my perspective. Again, just my perspective. Evolution doesn't solve everything. Every evolution is another one of these, I call it insight overreach. My PhD is in evolutionary theory. It's not like I don't respect it. I respect what it does. I respect what it does the way that Darwin respected what it does. He talked about it as how we get speciation, and you could say not just species, but differentiation among beings that are trying. But Darwin knew that it didn't explain the struggle for existence. He says so. He ends the book with that bit about this view of life. And at one point, under his wife's influence, he says, breathed into many, one form or many, breathed into as a hand wave. He knew he had not explained the origins of life. People tried to say, dude, drop the other boot. You just explained life. No, he hadn't. And we have forgotten that. and ended up with a godlike version of it. So there are two versions of what evolutionary theory covers. This is insight overreach. And that's what we tend to do. We find something like information theory, Shannon's information theory, and then we start to think it covered everything and also do it like it's infinite. So um, natural selection was a bad choice of terms. Uh, he starts with a useful expository move. He says, notice that in artificial selection, farmers pick the better seeds. And then he says, so now let's talk about natural selection. Okay, is there anything selecting out there in the universe? Is it like Noah, under God's influence, choosing the right animals to go onto his ark? Is it like God deciding, selecting who goes to heaven or not? No, it's not like that. What we call natural selection is really just dissipation. Shit falls apart. So you could think of the claim that natural selection explains everything is like saying that erosion explains mountains. Yeah, it explains how they get honed. No, it doesn't explain what gets honed. That's why our work, the work that Terry does, is on this fundamental question. How do selves making functional interpretive effort ever emerge? How could it ever emerge within nothing but dissipative chemistry? How did life manage to start such that it keeps its shit together for 3.8 billion years in a world where everything falls apart? Another example of this is self-organization theory that's been very popular lately, which is when you see order in the universe, that's proof that you've found life, because life is orderly, whirlpools are orderly, therefore self-organization explains everything. Very popular notion these days among the bio philosophers. Hello, you bought it, you name it. Uh, I'll get fluent in your name any minute now. I'm getting there. Good morning. And other folks, um, anybody who's joined in. Yeah, so it's really hard to corner people with that question, and trial and error doesn't explain it. One of the reasons why trial and error doesn't explain it is it doesn't explain where the normativity comes from. Normativity meaning better, worse, good, bad, all that sort of stuff. So trial and error it also implies non-error. Error itself is a normative term. So it's 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 really hard to explain what I'm on about, and plenty of people decide that I'm uh, a gibbering know-it-all prick. um, I've had some fabulous experiences just this last week like that. But what I'm trying to do is explain me to me, despite me, despite me not despite me not wanting to explain me, but actually flatter me, um, from the ground up with no cornucopias, none of these abstract things that humans can do. No rhinoceroses spinning the universe on its horn, which I swear it's just everywhere. You hear it in politics, you hear it in morality, you hear it in science. And I'm trying to get I'm trying to get through that. So when my godson bro asks me uh, why I don't think that current scientific progress is going to yield us a view, a theory of everything eventually, the kind of thing that Robert Sapolsky would argue. Um, it's because of this. We've had two scientific revolutions. We're waiting for one more. And I think Terry gives us hints at the third one. And this has to do with something fundamental in logic that I will now uh, go on. Let's see. I hear great to use your word arrow would be yes. I think that what we call natural selection is really just the second law, operating second law of thermodynamics. That is, if so, yeah. Let me try this for a second. Um, the overlooked thing in the sciences, even though it has yielded some of the most important insights as we've ever had, is what doesn't happen. So and really, I've come up with a term that I think deals with it. What we're talking about is um, the likely and unlikely presences and absences of matter in space and time. The term of art is constraint. There's what I'm doing is constrained. It's internally constrained. That's what checks and balances are. They're keeping the processes in check. It's making unlikely me falling apart. So we live in a universe where we have conservation of energy, conservation of matter, and people saying, well, nothing new under the sun. So there's there can't be emergence. Nothing can emerge if there's conservation of matter and energy. And we say not quite. What emerges are constraints, um, and constraints can come and go. So think about traffic congestion. It's a kind of fluid constraint. It's not a solid thing, and it doesn't violate the conservation of energy and matter, but it does make some paths less likely than others. There are paths of least resistance around traffic congestion. And also, the traffic congestion can come and go. So that's a simple example. It's not a living example. You could do the same. That's what water turbulence is. And water turbulence is not people trying to get somewhere. It's basically the it's the ways in which things are in check against each other. So water turbulence is an example of lots of molecules working against each other, and it changes likely flows. And it also leads to self-organization. That is, it tends to resolve to a path of least resistance, which is the whirlpool shape. Okay, and the whirlpool is a constraint. It's a constraint in that it makes more and less likely some directions of flow for the water molecules. So constraints come and go, and it's very hard for minds to think about them. That's why so constraint sounds like a wall. So that's a thing that's present that blocks things. And not all constraints are solid, static things like that. But this is the thing about the human mind, is that we tend to reify, we tend to come up with names for solid things that we recognize as present. They can be imaginary things like God's love or whatever like that, but we reify all the time. I can give a name to anything, real or imaginary, and treat it like it's a solid. And so it's very hard for us to see fluid constraints. And so we talk about top-down causality or bottom-up causality without ever explaining how it happens. We get completely descriptive. Let me see what we've got here. I don't want to. Yes, a lot of Wiegand, you're on it. That's right. We're talking about variations in viscosity. And how does that happen? Because some bonds are stronger than others, and it's always relative to something outside. So my term for constraint is cluster flux. It's in flux. What I am at any given time is in flux, but it is within bounded likelihoods. It's also very hard to find a word. I had to coin the term unlikelification. Traffic congestion unlikelifies flow through it. And that's not a great term, because ifying suggests that something is doing it. So it's actually unlikelying. Traffic congestion unlikelies some paths. I'm unlikelifying my own death. That's what I'm doing. That's job one. And I'm doing it unconsciously without feeling. That's what my body's doing all the time. And though I live in my heart and my mind mostly, and mostly treat my body like a station wagon that carries around my heart and mind, it's just the kind of guy I turned out to be. I'm very indoorsy, and I kind of live in my mind. But I do, where my mind goes is paying a lot of attention to trying to understand the unlikelifying that I am doing, that we are doing all the time. Okay, let's see what we got. Okay, here's a question for you. G. Myers Gilmer. In every avenue, what we do not known vastly overwhelms what we do know. That's right. That I agree with you. That's not right. I agree with you. I'm not the authority on what's right. Otherwise, there will be a pill for creativity, love, trust, merit. Why we do it all for what? Scientific materialism will never understand love. Same reason we say say I love you with all my heart. We don't say with all my head. Yeah, okay. I see you moving in a direction I want to. Dualism of reductionism becomes authoritarian. Yeah, I'm almost with you. I'm halfway with you, but I think you're making a move that I wouldn't make. So let me distinguish my move and see what you think of it. And feel free to critique it, and also feel free to email me if we don't get if the critique doesn't work here. When I look at the history, intellectual history, I see us alternating between reductionism and dualism. Reductionism is there's nothing but conservation, matter, energy. So if you can't explain it from that, that's all we are. And this is called eliminativism. There is no trying. It's all just matter in motion. It's a kind of material reductionism. But the alternative, which I hear you hinting at, G. Myers, is that there's another realm where there's love. And I have a wonderful exchange with this. He's a young, handsome Russian mathematician at Berkeley. And I think I've mentioned this before. Sorry if you've heard it before. He wrote a book called Love and Math. And he did a presentation I went to. It was a small book reading at a local bookshop. And I got to ask the first question, which was nice. And I asked him, so do you have a math of love? And he said, no, it's not only is it undefinable, but I wouldn't want to define it. And then I caught up with him at a party. Every time I see him, I ask him whether he's made any progress on that idea. No, he doesn't want to make progress on it. Love is this je ne sais quoi, magical whatever. His book turned out to be really about love of math. That's all. That's all. And math, by the way, is a place where you've got no work, no cost. You can posit anything. I will get back to why I don't think science as it's currently practiced is dealing well. It's related to what I'm talking about here. It will be able to give us a theory of everything as it's currently practiced. I totally believe in scientific progress, but I think we're missing one scientific revolution. Let me just cap that here because I don't want to go too many split ends, too many tangents. We've had one scientific revolution in the Greek era. It was the imposing rigor on internal consistency. It was, or what we call formalism. So math and logic come out of that one. That's great. The second one was what we think of as a scientific revolution, which is imposing rigor on correspondence through empiricism. That's the scientific method as people see it. But we're missing one. And it's imposing rigor on categorization. Because anybody can say love and define it however they want. And anybody can say information and define it any way they want. And as a result, this is what I think makes Chomsky's a lightweight, obvious move, is you simply posit this language module. You don't even have to think about how it came about or how we maintain it or why it would have stuck around. If you assume it at the beginning, you don't have to explain how it comes about. So try this out as an exercise in logic. You might want to write this down even. We've got deduction. That's where it all started. This is where formalism starts. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. That is, if you start with a universal rule and then you apply that rule to a case, then you get a very clear, absolute solution. All men are mortal. If all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, it's irrefutable. There's no alternative. So this guy who I'm fond of, and the guy who came up with pragmatism as a philosophical approach, and semiotics, which is where I work, which is basically how interpretation happens. since nothing's interpreting in the physical world for the first 10 billion years, and now we're out here interpreting. What is it? How does it happen? Thank you, Jay. I will call you Jay. Thank you. That helps me. Um, uh, now try this. Socrates is a man. So I'm going to reverse the order of them. Socrates is a man. Socrates is immortal. There is a mortal. Therefore, all men are mortal. That's empiricism. That's induction. That is, if you have cases of something, you can conclude something. So let's try this out. Let's make it personal. You go out on a date with this guy named David on Monday. And Mondavid was fun. And then you go out on another date with him. Tuesdavid was fun. Wednesdavid was fun. Therefore, all Davids are fun. Not necessarily. That's the problem with induction. It's kind of open-ended. Are all men mortal? Well, we won't know until the last one has died. There are cases of induction where you do get closure, full closure. For example, if I checked my wallet and all the bills in it were 20s, then I'd know that all the bills in my wallet were 20s. But on all the interesting questions, the one where we really want to figure it out, it's kind of open-ended, a black swan issue. So we had deduction. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore then Socrates is immortal. Then we have induction, which is Socrates is a man, Socrates is mortal, therefore all men are mortal. Which is how you got your assumption that you started with in deduction. And that's limited. Like if you went on one date with David, that wouldn't tell you much. So what you do is you add more dates. But how many dates do you add before you draw that conclusion? So Plato was mortal, Aristotle was mortal, my dad was mortal, et cetera, et cetera. How many do you go? That's an open-endedness. But the order in which we came to these things, having gotten language in the first place, is perfectly natural. Deduction is the easy one, and we have been obsessed with deduction as if we could solve the world from some first principle. Some intuitive first principle. That has been the craving. It shows up in logic and math. It shows up in the history of science. Then we discover in the 1600s, in the beginning of the scientific revolution, I'm not great on the dates, that we needed empiricism to impose rigor on induction. So we could have not just a coherent theory that holds together because it's formal, because it's deductive, but one that is grounded in reality. And then, so at that point, you've got empiricism, and once again, you have insight over reach. We've got formalism, math and logic. We've got empiricism, we're done. And I'm saying we're waiting for a third scientific revolution. Watch this. I'm going to flip those three statements again. Socrates is mortal. Man is mortal. Therefore, Socrates is man. Socrates and man both have an attribute in common, and therefore they are what we call identity. They are one and the same. Set aside the set that man is a larger set. What you're saying is it's what we do in murder mysteries. There was a suspect and there was a murderer. The murderer had red hair, the suspect had red hair. The murderer had a motive, the suspect had a motive. What you're doing is you're compounding attributes to figure out whether something belongs in a set or not. And what I'm saying is we do not have rigor in that domain at present. That domain, so we call the first one deduction, we call the second one induction, and we call the third one abduction. Not like stealing something, but it's basically how we come up with hunches about what belongs where. You see it in taxonomy, and you see the way that it starts out in taxonomy with Linnaeus, who says these animals have these traits in common, therefore they cluster together. And little by little, we've imposed greater rigor on that through what's called cladistics. That is, we can follow the genetic lines and see that actually whales are mammals, not fish. But it would naturally start out with attributes in common. So this is how we do all of we could call our intuitive categorization, our intuitive abduction. we operate it on all the time. That is, you showed up here and I look like this. I look more or less. Basically the same cluster flux you saw last week if you were here. So you simply assume I'm the same dude. And it works really well, but not when you're trying to figure out the origins of life and how that works. We just posit these categories. Suddenly there's this thing called information or this thing called a grammar module, and that solves everything, which is basically a yearning for deduction. If you start with a fundamental rule, I've got this grammar module, then everything else follows from it. Basically, what you're doing is you're smuggling what you're trying to explain into your explanation. That's why I have trouble with it. And I have trouble with it in religion. I have trouble with it in politics. I have trouble with it in science. Let's see. I'm going to take a look at some questions here. Who is a master that makes the grass green, David? Yeah, there is no master. That's my point. It's only us chickens. And I think that's why we're so damn chicken. It's why we keep on positing these imaginary name droppable abstractions, because can you imagine it? Just stop to think about what we are. We're the first creatures who can imagine, first creatures in this neck of the woods who can imagine the whole ball of wax and us in it. And it'd be lonely. It'd be scary. It's like orphans. It's like born identity. You were born into this world. You didn't get instructions. You don't have packing slip. You don't know who you are. And you start to look around. It's terrifying to think that it's just us. And no wonder there's so much power in these self-funding movements that posit the abstractions, like Trumpism is. It's a wonder that someone said, is Terry a Trumpist? No, he's not. I do have some Trumpist friends, but not that many. Some of my best friends are Trumpists. I can't say that. They're more fascinating to me than they are soulmates. I wish they were soulmates, but you can't find a soul in these guys. I mean, they're busy hiding their souls. They want to pretend like they represent, at least, if not are, God. Okay, let's see. Where are we? All Socrateses are mortal. Let me play off of so my answer to my godson bro is no, until we bring some rigor to abduction, to categorization, and keep people from simply positing modules or infinite cost-free whatevers, like we're engineers basically describing humans by adding widgets to them. We're not going to make progress on it. And when I first started doing this work, I was so thrilled. I thought I better get this stuff out as soon as possible. And what's happened to me is I've realized, I had to get it out as soon as possible so I wouldn't be scooped. That's not happening. People don't want these questions, except for you guys. So thank you for being here, if you want them. Like I said, it's irony of existence. It's scary good. See, how you get to that place where it becomes delicious is the really interesting question for me. I did that video a couple of weeks ago about how the Dunning-Kruger effect is not as smart as it thinks it is. And in it, I tried to graph out, as a first pass graph at how you get there. It's humbling at first, but it's a sweet ride up once up a gradual learning curve once you get over a certain kind of hump. And so how to entice people or kick people over that hump is really interesting to me. As I think I don't remember where I put this. Yeah, I put this in a video I put this in the video I put out yesterday, which is I do see the height of autophobia, which would be absolutist, as people hiding within a spiked suit of armor. It's not the emperor has no clothes. It's that the emperor is hiding inside of suit of armor. So the range of things I try is everything from kicking the shit out of the armor, rattling that cage as much as possible. And the other is closer to Terry's temperamental style, which is you look for a chink in the armor and you reach through and you say, hello, you in there? I'm out here. We could talk. We're humans. Whether that would be enough to get someone unaddicted to that herobotic behavior, it's unlikely, but that's all we got at this point. Let's see. Getting all those what I was getting at with overcoming autophobia. Yes. Okay, good. Jeff, I get what you mean now. That makes perfect sense. So you're not overcoming your autophobia. You're not saying I once was lost, but now I'm found in who I honestly am. You're getting over the hump. Thank you. So it's overcoming enough autophobia that you can tolerate this. You probably heard this before. I was long troubled by the name philosophy, love of wisdom, because any schmuck can claim that they love wisdom. I mean, and every idiot does. So, for example, if you went to a party and someone asked you what you're up to, and you said, "I want to make $1 million," or "I want to get all the poontang I can," you'd actually be more trusted than if you said, "I'm pursuing wisdom." That it got its bad reputation that way. Why do we call it love of wisdom? I finally come up with an explanation that serves me, because you have to overcome this need for self-reassurance enough to be able to tolerate it. And once I started on that notion, I realized that some of my favorite statements about philosophy are in line with that. Bertrand Russell calls it a peculiarly stubborn attempt to think clearly. What's it stubborn against? My desire for self-flattery, my desire for reassurance. I don't want to make it sound like a bad thing. It's a human thing. I need lots of reassurance. You do too, I bet. We all do. I don't want to ignore that. I want to respect that. I want to exercise that need for self-flattery and manage it. So philosophy is a peculiarly stubborn attempt to think clearly. And the other one just knocked me out when I first read it, and still does. Philosophers find their true perfection, knowing the follies of humankind by introspection. This is from a guy who was he basically was Niels Bohr's amanuensis. That's what you call a guy like me to Terry Deacon, or what you'd call this guy um, uh, to Niels Bohr. He's a sidekick who was really interesting. His name is Piet Hein, Pietheine, and he was a mathematician, and he was a polymath. He did all sorts of things. He in the 1970s and 60s, you could go into bookstores around the country and buy his puzzles that he made, wooden puzzles that he invented. He made furniture. But the thing I liked that he did most was that he wrote these really short bumper sticker size poems, and was important to the Danish resistance movement because of it. So I encourage you to look him up. I love his work. He called them grooks. They're all out of print now. I went and bought old copies of all of his grooks and turned them into a master PDF file. If you email me, I'll send you a link to them. They are charming. They're all along the lines of philosophers find their true perfection, knowing the follies of humankind by introspection. I have discovered that I can do anything as long as there's a few role models around. I think that's a dangerous prospect for humans, but I don't need everybody to do it. I just need a few people to do it. And so there was real comfort in meeting Terry and finding out that there was room for this too on Earth. But it does make us kind of foreigners. But Piet Hein is also like that for me. He's one of these guys who he followed his nose. It's why I love intellectual history so much. I disagree with Niels Bohr's approach to quantum physics. And I disagree with many of my predecessors. That's not the point. I'm interested in how they were curious and how they let their curiosity run, which relates to something I wrote this morning. There's all this talk these days about how we got to be braver and stand up for our principles. But here's a challenge. The reason most people don't is they have to look out for them and theirs. When I was studying history and Nazism, the term I heard, I haven't been able to find it elsewhere, was the Zippenhof strategy, which was don't attack your challenger, attack their family. So this is a challenge I think we have to face, which is when someone buckles under Trump. Yeah, it could be that they're so pathetic that they need to keep their jobs more than survive in the country. There is that aspect, more than, make sure that American democracy is preserved. But there's also this other challenge, which is I can be selfless for myself, but I can't be selfless for my kids. Nietzsche at one point says, "A married philosopher is a joke," and uh, that's too harsh. But I do see what he's getting at, which is um, once you have um, those those responsibilities, it gets harder to sacrifice. This was what happened to the commune I was on. We were all ready to be on the front lines in this game of social change, but we all ended up having a bunch of kids, and we couldn't sacrifice on behalf of the kids. The kids weren't getting by. Yeah, amanuensis, right? It's a fun job. I could never be Terry. He's way more encyclopedic than me. And if you look at where we were in the 1970s, he's getting his PhD at Harvard, and I'm doing plumbing on a commune. So I was really lucky because at Harvard they called him a genius and a saint. The saint part was that he didn't give a fuck who he talked to. He'll talk to anybody who's curious. Status didn't matter to him, which makes it so much easier to ride his status. And the other delight is in 30 years together, that boy has never once pulled rank on me. And I can't even remember a time he's tooted his horn. He's in this other world. He is married, and I think he's a brilliant philosopher. But and not because his wife resonates with his philosophy. In fact, he made a point of not marrying someone who was in the same line of research as him because he didn't want to be tainted by that. Um, uh, Timothy, you say, have I explored analytic idealism? Well, I've explored idealism and I've explored analytic philosophy. And analytic philosophy is, from my perspective, it's exactly what I was talking about, which is that we can solve it all with deduction. Um, uh, but I will have to look up analytic idealism to understand what it is. Uh, that's putting together two kiss of death words for me. But maybe it's doing it in a way that doesn't end up bottoming out in the same cornucopias. Analytic idealism. I'm dealing these days with some physicists who just everything. If it's not explained by math, it's not explained. I just caught before the meeting. I caught this quote for Werner Heisenberg. I just disagree fundamentally with this. I think that modern physics has definitely decided in favor of Plato. Uh, in fact, the smallest units of matter are not physical objects in the ordinary sense. They are forms, ideas, which can be expressed unambiguously only in mathematical language. To people with a hammer, everything's a nail. And this guy had a fluency with math that I don't have. I do think that modern physics has decided in favor of Plato. I think all of science has, and I think it's a terrible mistake. It's the perfect storm of stupidity for us because Plato basically pulls out thin air ideals, cost-free ideals. He's doing basically what the Christians were doing over on the other side of the campus. Um, so you got God's will, or you got this impersonal idea of perfect love, and then you don't think about how it manifests in how it works, how God's will gets transferred into matter. You kind of think of you think about it the way we think of anything. If I want to move something, I move it. You do a kind of an efficient cause metaphor, cause and effect. So God's will causes, which is vague, our behavior, that sort of thing. Plato was doing the same damn thing. He wasn't claiming he had found what it was, or that there was no finding what it was. He was more ambitious than the Christians. The Christians simply posited God's love by their standards, which is why there are 45,000 different versions of Christianity right now. Everybody got different standards. Yeah, no. Okay, thank you, Timothy. That's you. I felt this. Yeah, yeah. To me, I don't buy it. I mean, vigorously, I don't. So this is the same thing I'm talking about. If you start by smuggling your answer into your question, you don't have to do any work. Here's how that shows up. Emergence is an important concept in my work, but it's a concept that doesn't get fleshed out. Yesterday, we did a study group. The people who are working with Terry, and by the way, you're invited. If you're serious about, if you're interested in these questions as I framed them, what is selves and trying and how do they emerge from nothing but dissipative chemistry? There's a meeting like this that happens every week on Friday from 3 to 5:30. If in the Bay Area, we go out for dinner afterwards. People join from all over the world. We got all sorts in there. We got high-level physicists. We've got an art dealer. We got a guy there whose main work is he's the IT manager for a small community college in Utah. Terry doesn't care. If you're curious, you're curious. We got theologians in there. We've got young professors, and we all meet, and there's different topics each time. But anyway, where was I going? We got these physicists in there who start with that. They're basically playing out what Heisenberg was saying. Yeah. So if you say let's just assume consciousness is everywhere, and that it's everything, you got nothing left to explain. This is why this question is up for me. I mean, it's a big philosophical question. We say the biggest philosophical question is why is there something instead of nothing? I'm going to ask a different question. Why is there something instead of everything? Why is not everything all happening at once? My answer is emergent constraint. That's Terry's and my answer. And it's basically congestions that build on each other. It's way more complicated than that. But no, whirlpools are an important stepping stone. Self-organization, autocatalysis, or crystal formation is self-organization. Bernard cells, if you know that concept, that if you put a tray of oil on a heater, it will make these hexagonal cells. That's all self-organization. But it doesn't explain life. What we think explains the beginning of trying is when you have checks and balances between two self-organizing systems. And so I've made some videos about this. I did a Google talk on it, which is basically a chain reaction that happens to as a byproduct, put out the kinds of molecules that self-organize into shells. It's as simple as that. You don't get to start with DNA as an information-bearing molecule, whatever the fuck information is. You just assume there's this other fluid that you can pour into DNA molecules, which is where a lot of scientists end up kind of intuiting it is. They talk about information-bearing molecules without ever explaining information. So, no, Timothy, it's the same old, same old. It's not really that different from what Trump does. Analytic idealism is you say, okay, I'm going to start with, I'm for the right and righteous solution. You don't have to explain anything after that. You've got a master excuse. And then whatever comes along, you say, I no need do dirty for someone who represents the master excuse. I think there are dangerous parallels to that in analytic idealism. And I got to say, it is so much fun to play there. I think that's a big part of the autophobia, is that you don't ever have to worry about whether you're just promoting one fad against other fads. And there is no standard for deciding which fad is better. All of these fads are internally consistent. All of them are tack welded to some empirical evidence. That is, you find empirical evidence for whatever, but you posited abstractions, and so no, it's not going to get there. Okay, that's the reason I asked. Because filters consciousness. Yeah, yeah. And so this is also something that came up in one of the recent videos. Maybe it's the one coming out today. Which is a funny one because I recorded a good version of it, but I forgot that I was trying on a T-shirt, so it's got my tag right here through part of it, and then I start to realize I got the tag. But I liked the take, so I ended up going with it. but my point is about consciousness. Consciousness studies doesn't get to it. It starts with a solid object and tries to describe it. What is it? What is its attributes? Which is like me saying, okay, well, I'm going to start with this rhinoceros that spins the universe on its horn, and now I'm going to flesh it out with description. Um, our work is explaining how in strictly physical terms. And at no point in Terry's work does he get to posit an abstraction. He can posit them, but he has to explain them from everything that precedes it. What I call ergodynamic. That is, dynamics is about change, and in general, it's change in populations of things, like traffic congestion is a kind of change in physical work. So Terry has set himself the task of explaining all the way from the fact that shit falls apart, or that constraints fall apart. Constraints are rare, like a whirlpool is a constraint, but they're not rare. Sorry. There are constraints since the Big Bang, but they are all tending to fall apart. What happens before the Big Bang, or while there's anything that could fall apart? We're not getting there. That's for future generations. Is my assumption about it. Michael, thank you for catching that. Do you know how it tickles me when someone uses one of my terms? It tickles me pink. I used to think, wow, I'm going to get everybody to talk my language. And then I realized, no way, no way. But when someone gets it, it means it's what I call evidence. It's evidence that this is a real conversation. Now, it would especially work if I had inside jokes for you, Michael, as well. That is things you've said that I could bring back in to the conversation. But that you use these things means I'm being heard. It's so delightful. And I'm assuming at some point I won't be and shouldn't be. That there's a time when you just retire from this and all you're left to do is take careful notes on it while you can. But in the meantime, I'm not used to audience. I haven't had a lot of audience. I'm in a way grateful for not having had a lot of audience, because I had to wean myself off of the appetite for affirmation enough to keep on doing it, despite the fact that there wasn't much audience. But I really like it when someone brings something back in, and there have been several in here. And it just proves once and for all that I am God. Okay, let's see. I was kidding, just in case you were wondering. Let's see. Harden to not smuggle some answer with statements when you only have 200 words. Ask. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I get that. Yeah, I get that. And this is also a challenge in my work. It's a challenge in Terry's work too. I used to get really frustrated with him for burying the lead in his writing. He'd write these long books, and it would take the longest time for him to get to the punchline. And then at some point, I realized he's got too many leads. You got to explain this methodology thing. There's this thing about where you're going to start from. You got to explain why it's not okay to use these abstractions. You got to explain how self-organization actually emerges. So this is the thing about the word emergence. Imagine a dialogue. We really got to figure out how life emerges, says one guy. The other guy says, yeah, that's a really good question. How does it? And the other guy says, I just told you, it emerges. That's what we do. At one point I had to write a limerick about it. I just felt compelled to. No one asked me to write limericks ever. But we talk in engineering about black boxes. A black box is something you know what it does. Chomsky's language module is a black box. You know what it yields you, but you don't know how it yields you it. And so I wrote something called white boxes. We all need a reason to hope, a leg up on this up-tilted slope. Some terms scientific sound super terrific. Is there hope made specific? Well, nope. And try that one more time. We all need a reason to hope, a leg up on this up-tilted slope. Some terms scientific sound super terrific. Is there hope made specific? Well, nope. I think that's what I'm talking about here. Is these abstractions. They show up in science. That's why I was writing it. I was writing it in response to how people were using the term emergence. It emerges. Never mind how. And the sense that, well, good things emerge. It's where the sciences end up being ported into popular ideas. Quantum mechanics explains consciousness, and consciousness is a wonderful thing, or whatever. Or this version of it, the second law explains life, because in the end we get this heat death where energy is everywhere. It's not free energy anymore. It can't be used for anything. But that's the kind of thing that happens. Dan Brown wrote a book that takes self-organization theory out to that happy ending. It's pathetic. Okay, even though I just because you do observe an audience. Thank you, G. Meyer. And I want to hear where you disagree with me on concepts. So feel free to get in touch with me. Here's something I have done. If someone got a bone to pick with me, or a critique, or any of that, let's just Zoom. Let's have a conversation where you and I talk it through and figure out where we agree and disagree, knowing that it's totally fine to disagree. Truth emergent from the disagreements among friends. That's where I want to go. So if you've got some ideas you'd want to run by me, email me, and we can go from there. We can build out from there. Okay, let's see, what else have we got here? Because we're winding down any minute now. Enough of Jeremy already. Let's see, I'm just taking a look here. I have to live with me, but you? The reason we don't is a level of anger in people under the stress of society today. I want to pick up on that, Shirley. Let's see. Let's see. So I don't know what the "we don't" is, because that was probably a. Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna pick up on something Liminal says, which is, my friend insists there must be a supernatural explanation for the universe. My question is, what is supernatural? And then I'm going to get to Shirley's, because they're actually related from my perspective. So think about a few years back, I was thinking about, what's going on with this whole thing about the supernatural. It's a wild card, trump card. Wild card means that you can think anything you want about the supernatural. It's not like we haven't proven it yet. It's unprovable. It's happening outside of nature. If there were a God and he wrote in the sky that I am God, that would be in the natural realm. It still wouldn't be evidence of the supernatural. So it's a wild card. And it's also super. It's a trump card. Who wouldn't want that? A lizard would want that. A plant would want that. It's ultimate freedom, wild card. Ultimate safety, trump card. Nothing can stop you. You are incorrigible in the original sense, uncorrectable. There's nothing could correct you. It's basically the Icarus move, and not solved with you can't reach the heights because there's a higher God. It's not that. But boy, would people want that. That's exactly what I mean by the cornucopia. That's what people would want, which gets to the point Shirley makes, which is the reason we don't is the level of anger in people under the stress of society today. So this is the biggest challenge. Just when we need to stop and reflect on what the actual fuck we are, the reason we need to do that is because we're stressed, and that keeps us from doing this. So this is a new thought that just come to me. I've been very interested in rebound relationships in general. So imagine if your habits aren't working anymore. You don't have to imagine, they aren't. In fact, a bunch of the habits we cultivated over the decades are no longer likely to work in our new world. Some of that is the imposition of self-funding tyrants and oligarchs. Another is that the world is getting complicated, and we didn't kind of foresee it. So we got all these. So we're being dislodged from our groove. And the paradox is that, or the irony, you could say, is not being in your groove is a hell of a time to find a new groove. It's why there are rebound relationships. When someone has been ousted from a groove, partnership, They're desperate to find the next groove. This is why we'd end up with "I once was lost, but now I'm blind" syndrome. Is people will give up a dogma, but why would you give up the dogmatism? It's way more comfortable to be dogmatic. So we're not just angry. Anger, I think, may be what you get once you have your supernatural thing. And the supernatural thing is simply an idealization. So the way it comes to me, the way I think about it is, oh hell no, fuck this fucking shit. I've had it. From now on, I'm in charge. Why am I in charge? Well, because I represent goodness. What goodness do I represent? This particular lifestyle brand, this particular um, identity uh, politics, this master excuse. That's what you get in stress. But the anger comes, you could say the anger might be the motivation in the beginning. You got what we're talking about is turmoil, um, internal irregularity, doubt, anxiety, all of that. It's like the alarm is going off inside of us, and we want to shut it down. And we don't want to shut it down so we feel okay. We're terrified by what we've just gone through, the anxiety, and so we want to feel enlightened, or at least fake it till we make it. That is, claim that we're on the path to enlightenment and therefore should be listened to. I think this is why civilization is in real trouble. And it's not about the lifestyle brand. It's about basically pulling out your ass some imaginary idealization, claiming you represent it, and then going around and bullying people by it. Since I know since I know that you shouldn't be judgmental, and I say it a lot, um, I'm the authority on who's judgmental, and I'll be the judge of who's being judgmental and therefore wrong. That's all Trump has done. That's where I see us actually bottoming out. I commented the other day, as it's worse than Planets of the Apes, is that what we're dealing with is feral humans. Uh, our overlords are not wiser apes or apes with a vengeance. It's feral humans who are braying in anger and angst and insisting that their braying is a papal decree. It, and so every once in a while, I think about, because I'm Jewish and only the paranoid survive. I'm psycho-Semitic. I think about, okay, well, so what happens if this really plays out and I end up tortured to death? I don't want to get grandiose about it. I know that I'm a small player. That's one of the good things about having a small audience. Um, and I also know that nothing I say is likely to make much of a dent in this world. But still, what do you do at that point? In a way, I bought the whole package when I was born. Um, and so I'm fine with having it end with what happens in reality. Uh, I'm not fine. I'd be less fine if my kids were tortured. Um, and I'd be disappointed. But also, I have to remember, if I died today, this has been the luckiest life I could have imagined. To get to spend this kind of time sitting on a porch alone or with you, speculating carefully about the whole ball of wax and us in it. That turned out to be my favorite thing. And I feel just really lucky that I had the appetite, aptitude, and opportunity to do it. A lot of people have the appetite and aptitude. I'm seeing that by talking to people who have day jobs and still have that appetite and aptitude. But it's just dumb luck that I ended up with a life where I could actually do this stuff full time. So I've had more than enough already. But my point was, this is a curriculum. Just trying. I'd rather spend my life dealing with reality as best I can guess what it is, than humoring myself through the supernatural. I feel lucky. feel lucky that way. Let's see if there's one more thing. Let's see. And lucky to get to share it with you guys. Yeah, yes. Okay. Now, so it's interesting, Jay. We've got a there's one guy in the research group who is an Ayn Rand fan. Um, Ayn Rand Ayn Rand represents the other version of the supernatural move. I mean, just think of how clearly she does it, how cleanly she does it. She declares objective philosophy, which is like saying all the other philosophies are unrealistic. Mine is the most realistic. And then what has she got? She's basically a counterculture. So she was burnt by communism, and then creates the whole counter example of it through libertarianism, and a total piece of work, and just whining nonstop about how oppressive the world is to heroes like her. It's the same damn thing. We've been doing this since the beginning of religion. And I think that any organism with language anywhere in the universe would be doing exactly this. As we're trapped in this. That's what we're dealing with, okay? And how to counter it when that sells so well. It's so self-funding to do the Ayn Rand move or the Christian move. I hereby represent all that is good to the infinite. No trade-offs in her work. There's no trade-offs. She's found the one direction to go. Marx also suffers from this problem. It's like strive for the inevitable, which I find to be paradoxical. Hers is another version of it. Michael, I can't stand Ayn Rand either, but I do want to study the moves she's making rather than just finding it distasteful. In general, that's my move these days. Is I want to understand why I can't stand it, because otherwise it just becomes an aesthetic issue. Yes, I'm trying to get at that. Yes. So what I can't stand about them is, and yet bless their pointed heads, these were earlier times. Science was just coming into it was just beginning to flourish. We had confidence in it. It's insight overreach. So someone finds a half-truth like freedom is good. Freedom and safety are good, but they would just say freedom is good. And then they say, turn freedom up to infinity. I represent freedom turned up to infinity. Therefore, anybody who constrains me is oppressive. That's where the whining comes in. So all we're doing here is meditating over and over on the practices of human beings, including us, the impulses in human beings, the ways in which language enables us to exercise our impulses, because it enables us to create these solid, absolute goods and not think about the costs of things, language modules, that sort of thing. And I'll just continue to go through this stuff as much as anybody likes. And so, okay, thank you guys for being here today. Let's see. Yeah, no, that's right. It's always, once again, this is the thing, and Michael's been picking up on this, the Chinese fortune cookie, the fortune cookie solution. Yeah, empathy by my standards. Yeah, like that. All right. See you guys. Oh, one last thing. Email me. I'm forgetting the name here. G Myers. Email me if you want a conversation like that. Email me if you want particular help with something you're dealing with. I continue to do strategic consulting one-on-one. I got some amazing clients. I mean, they're really high level folks, some of them, when we're just extremely pragmatic. It's neither pep talk coaching, nor is it, get to what happened in your childhood psychotherapy. It's got everything on the table. And mostly we deal with tough judgment calls, someone who's dealing with doubts, or with someone who's dealing with an absolutist at close range in their lives. And then the study group is still happening. It's every other Sunday. So the next one is the Sunday after this. It's free. We don't take roll. Spectators welcome. I don't share your email. It's people just dealing with the strategic questions about how to deal with people who have gone absolute through one of these things we've been talking about. And Yeah, and also just email me if you got a question or concept you want to play with. Um, Having recognized that I can now do some unscripted videos actually frees up some time, which is good. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, one and all. Thank you, men and women, and everybody else. And we'll talk again.